Ma'am, this area is for clients only. Please, step aside. The voice rang out just as Jocelyn's second heel touched the lobby carpet. It was the kind of voice that could strip a person's worth in a single sentence. Not loud, just cold enough to freeze an entire morning. She looked up. The woman who'd spoken was wearing a light-colored suit, a name tag barely visible on her lapel, Chloe, receptionist. Jocelyn smiled. Not the kind of smile that makes peace. The kind you wear when you've heard this line more times than your own name. She held out her wallet. I have a 10:30 appointment. Private banking. Chloe didn't look at the ID. She looked at Jocelyn's coat, black cashmere. No label. Looked at her low, unfussy bun. Looked at her tiny, round earrings, nothing that sparkled. Then she said, "One moment," and turned her back. Jocelyn stood still, one hand resting lightly on her bag strap, the ceiling light glinting off nude painted nails, quiet, deliberate. A silence no one in this lobby noticed, except someone who had once been asked to leave simply because they didn't look like someone we serve. A minute passed, then 3. When Jocelyn stepped toward the info desk, someone else stepped up too. A white man, silver-haired. Navy suit arrived barely 10 seconds after her. Chloe sprang up. "Good morning. Mr. Layton. Right this way." She led him inside without a glance back, leaving Jocelyn in the lobby like a package rejected for having the wrong wrapping. 10 minutes later, Bethany Walsh, the branch manager, appeared. Her face was all sales training, cheerful but bloodless, professional but never tested. "Hi. You requested a transaction," Jocelyn nodded. She opened her wallet and handed over her ID, her bank card, and a stamped document. "I need to withdraw $250,000 from my investment account." Bethany frowned, then quickly masked it with a smile. The kind of smile people wear when they miss a step on the stairs, but pretend they meant to dance. "That's quite a large amount. May I ask what the withdrawal is for?" Jocelyn didn't answer. She simply nudged the paperwork closer. Bethany glanced over it, then looked up. "We'll need to verify this with our risk team. Do you have another form of identification, driver's license, passport, business card, or the deed to this building? Take your pick." Bethany's lips curled. Cute. She turned and signaled for another staff member. A young man with slicked back hair, a shirt tucked too precisely. Someone who probably used cologne to mask character. "Jordan, can you come over?" Jordan approached, reviewed the documents, then looked to Bethany. "This doesn't look right. She doesn't match the profile for account tier access." Jocelyn slipped the paperwork back into her bag. "I wasn't aware profile matching was part of your fiduciary policy." Jordan said nothing. Bethany lowered her voice just loud enough to be heard, but soft enough that a few words still floated to nearby ears. "She's escalating. Should we ask her to leave?" A nearby guest glanced over at Jocelyn. That familiar glance, not hostile, just uneasy, like they were witnessing a situation. Jocelyn exhaled slowly. "This isn't about escalation. This is about access." Bethany crossed her arms. "Well, your access is currently on hold. Until we verify you are who you say you are." Jocelyn tilted her head. "You mean, until I look like who I say I am?" Bethany flushed. "Don't twist this." "I don't have to," Jocelyn said, her tone as straight and sharp as a steel ruler. "You've already done that." No one answered, because no one was trained to handle a woman who wasn't angry just exactly. Painfully right. "Security to the lobby." Bethany spoke into her radio. A security guard appeared. Young, unsure. He looked at Jocelyn, then at Bethany. "Escort this woman out," Bethany said, her voice finally cracking just enough to show it. "For what reason?" the guard asked, hesitant. "She's uncooperative." Jocelyn didn't argue. She stepped aside and pulled out her phone. not to call for help, but to turn on the camera, aiming it squarely at the nameplate on the desk. Outside, the sun was still shining. Inside, the air had just gone cold. "Bethany Walsh," she said loud enough for everyone to hear. "You're going to want to remember that name. We've seen plenty like you before." The voice came from behind the transaction desk. Cold, judgmental, but still wrapped in the disguise of procedure. It belonged to Jordan, the bank's internal control officer. He stood with arms crossed behind the counter, glancing down at Jocelyn's file, like he was reviewing a job application, not a valid transaction backed by full documentation. "It's usually large cash withdrawals. Then they vanish," Jordan continued. "Sometimes the accounts aren't even in their name." Jocelyn stared straight at him. She said nothing. Her silence unsettled him, but not enough to make him stop. Bethany interjected, her voice soft, almost coaxing. "Ma'am, if you can't provide further documentation for the transaction purpose, I'm afraid we'll have to delay processing." She didn't use the words deny or suspicious, but the meaning was clearer than any surveillance footage. "You're not trustworthy, and I don't need a valid reason to feel that way." Jocelyn calmly removed her leather gloves, folded them neatly, and placed them on the counter. "I have the right to access my account," she said, slowly. "I've provided every required document, and this amount is well within the transaction limits." Jordan scoffed. "You don't get it. It's not about the paperwork. It's about the context." "Context?" Jocelyn raised an eyebrow. Bethany stepped in, her voice lowered like she was doing Jocelyn a favor. "There's been a rise in fraudulent transactions. We can't take risks, especially when someone has no clear customer profile." "You're saying I have no profile?" Jocelyn asked. Bethany hesitated. "I mean, you're not listed as a preferred client, or you haven't appeared in our system before." A bold-faced lie. Jocelyn had stood in this exact spot last year signing the very contract that everyone here was pretending didn't exist. Jordan signaled another female staff member. A young woman approached face tense, uneasy, and quietly started typing something on her terminal. "We'll need to trace the origin of these funds," Jordan announced. "That's a required step before moving forward." Jocelyn nodded, composed. "That's fine. But I'd like a written statement confirming that my transaction is being held for a source of funds verification, despite having provided all documentation, and with no irregularities in my account history." Jordan froze. A flicker of worry crossed his eyes. Bethany stepped in quickly. "Ma'am, there's no need to take this so far." Jocelyn calmly took out her phone, camera still running, and pointed it upward to the ceiling, where one of the fixed surveillance cameras was mounted. "Luckily, everything's being recorded," she said softly, "including the part where you claimed I didn't fit the client profile, and the part where you created extra compliance hurdles because I wore a black coat with no designer label." Bethany paled. Jordan crossed his arms, scanning the room for backup, but the other staff members avoided his gaze. Jocelyn stepped closer to the counter. Her voice wasn't loud, but it rang out clearly. "You decided I didn't belong here from the moment I walked through that door." Silence fell over the transaction floor. Customers began to pay attention. An older man lowered his newspaper, glancing over. A younger woman adjusted her mask, eyes curious and alert. Bethany paused, then shifted tactics. "If you continue creating disruption, I'll have to involve security." Jocelyn didn't respond. She turned to the young female staff member still at the terminal. "What's your name?" The girl startled. Diane. "Diane. Do you see anything irregular in my file?" Diane looked at her screen, then shook her head gently. "No. Nothing's wrong. The account is valid." Bethany snapped her eyes toward Diane, a flicker of warning flashing through them. Jocelyn simply smiled. Thank you. You just saved yourself a very inconvenient future. At the entrance, a silhouette appeared, a dark brown trench coat, a leather briefcase. Eyes that seemed to scan the entire room in a single second. Richard Hawthorne, Jocelyn's personal attorney, had arrived. No one in the bank knew that the woman they were scrutinizing for her worn canvas shoes had once walked through million-dollar conference halls without saying a word. 14 months earlier, a foggy Tuesday morning, Jocelyn Reed sat inside a windowless room at the Brooklyn headquarters of the law firm Taylor & Finch. No nameplate, no public records. Just a thick, 47-page document with a single title, Acquisition Agreement, 1849 East Liberty Building. Jocelyn didn't sign it herself. She simply nodded. The signature came from Richard Hawthorne, her legal advisor for the past 12 years, a salt-and-pepper-haired man with a voice as steady as an old coffee machine. The deal was executed through a shell company named East Corridor Community Fund III, a fund Jocelyn had founded back in 2010. Mission of improving financial access for underserved minority communities. No one had paid attention to the fact that this fund had quietly acquired over 9 commercial properties in the city's economic hotspots. The bank branch Jocelyn was standing in today, that was property number 10. They thought she was just a walk-in client. In reality, she was the legal owner of the entire building, including the reception area, the vault, the meeting rooms, and even the branch manager's office. No one knew because she preferred it that way. Jocelyn had once stood on stage at the 2019 East Regional Investment Conference, but afterward, she chose to disappear from the media radar. Not out of fear, but because she understood real power doesn't ask for applause. She had witnessed too many boardrooms where men in suits preached equality, but couldn't name their own black department head. Too many banks boasting slogans like, serving every community, while their revolving doors only turned for people with Italian leather wallets. Jocelyn didn't argue with them. She bought the ground they stood on, and waited for the day they'd mistake her for someone unworthy of service, like today. Back to the present, behind the glass doors, Richard entered. He didn't speak, didn't smile, didn't gesture. He simply pulled a sealed envelope from his leather briefcase and handed it to the receptionist. Submit this directly to the branch manager, he said. Signature required upon receipt. Bethany was still rambling about security protocols when the assistant stepped in and whispered something into her ear. A flicker of panic crossed Bethany's face, quickly replaced by a cautious smile. Is there an issue? She asked, turning toward Richard. Richard placed his briefcase on the counter and looked straight at her as if weighing every word she was about to say. You've just refused service to the legal owner of this entire facility, he said, slowly. Bethany let out a sharp, dismissive laugh. You're joking. Right. Richard didn't flinch. He opened the envelope and pulled out a set of documents, including a notarized property purchase agreement and a detailed appendix outlining commercial land use rights for the next 15 years. On the top left corner, the name was printed clearly, Jocelyn M., Reed Chairwoman. East Corridor Community Fund III, legal purchaser of all fixed assets located at 1849 East Liberty Ave, including the entire Liberty Financial branch occupying the ground floor. No one laughed anymore. Bethany stepped back, her hand gripping the edge of the counter as if the room had tilted beneath her. A male employee rushed in from the back office. Phone in hand, the regional director has ordered an immediate halt to all transactions at this branch. He said breathlessly, they're verifying building ownership. The entire branch went into a state of suspended animation. Jocelyn remained perfectly still. She didn't need to say a word. She glanced at her watch. 7 minutes had passed. You said I don't look like a Liberty Financial client. Jocelyn tilted her head slightly. Behind the lenses, her eyes glinted with something that almost resembled pity. She still hadn't moved from her spot. She didn't need to. Bethany, who had just signed the receipt for the legal documents, swallowed hard. The smile she wore earlier was gone, replaced by uncertainty that crept into every crack of her voice. I, I'd like a few minutes to contact our legal department, she said, noticeably quieter now. Richard stood calmly beside her, gently closing his folder. Legal has already been contacted, he replied. From your side, what's left for you is to wait. Upstairs in the second-floor manager's office, the internal communication system lit up. A voice came through Regional Operations Director. No one is to leave the branch. All transactions are temporarily suspended. The head of HR is en route. Tellers behind the counter began exchanging uneasy glances. One picked up a phone, then locked the screen without typing. The air was thickening, every molecule sealed tight, as if even the oxygen feared saying the wrong thing. Amy, the young teller, who'd said a $75,000 withdrawal is suspicious, was now looking down, fiddling with her name tag like she wanted to tear it off. She knew everything was on security footage, already streaming to the central office. Jason, the one who chuckled when someone like her asked to withdraw cash, was pale as paper now. He had backed up to the wall, trying to separate himself from the tidal wave rising from the center of the building. Greg, the man who once barked questions at Jocelyn, stood frozen, eyes wide like someone seeing a completely different world from the one he thought was order and safety. Jocelyn didn't speak, because the truth was doing all the talking now, quietly, precisely. Like a financial audit, but this time, it wasn't accounts under review, it was character. An elderly man, the customer who'd stood behind Jocelyn the whole time, finally spoke. His voice deep and steady. She's the most dignified person I've ever seen walk into this bank. And you treated her like a criminal. A middle-aged white woman near the consultation desk murmured, I filed a complaint once about how Jason spoke to my mother. No one replied. Now I understand why. No one asked them to speak. But Jocelyn's silence had made room for every other voice to rise. 15 minutes later, 3 unmarked black sedans pulled up outside the branch. No sirens, no flashing lights, just 3 people in suits entering the building, carrying thick, stapled documents marked confidential review. Bethany stepped forward to greet them, but the man in front didn't stop. He walked straight up to Jocelyn and bowed slightly. Miss Reed, I'm Raymond Cleary, Regional Director of Ethics and Compliance for the Northeast. I deeply apologize for everything that occurred here today. His voice trembled, not out of fear of Jocelyn, but because he knew the institution he represented had just run into a mountain that made no sound. Jocelyn nodded once. What do you need from me? She asked. Raymond replied carefully. Your permission to access the original deed records and time to clean out this entire branch. Jocelyn didn't answer immediately. She looked to Richard. The attorney opened his briefcase and pulled out a power of ejection authorization, permitting immediate removal of branch management upon violation of the commercial lease agreement. The signature at the bottom was hers. She turned back to Raymond. You have exactly 24 hours. Replace the entire executive staff, rehire from the local community, and place me as permanent independent ethics advisor. Raymond didn't bargain. He just nodded. Jocelyn finally turned, surveying the bank one last time. Not in triumph. Just closing the chapter on a long, quiet history of having to prove she deserved space in a world she was paying to keep running. The glass door slowly closed behind Jocelyn Reed. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. Behind her, the central branch of Liberty Financial stood still, like a structure that had just withstood an earthquake. Not collapsed, but forever changed on the inside. Richard walked beside her, still holding the thick file sealed with Liberty's red compliance stamp. He said nothing. There was nothing left to say. At the third step down, Jocelyn paused. She turned, not to look back at the building, but directly at the large glass panel ahead. In that reflection, she didn't just see herself. She saw the image of a system that had just revealed its true nature. Inside, Bethany Miller sat motionless in the guest waiting area, the same seat once reserved for walk-in clients. Now, it was where she'd been asked to wait for termination paperwork. Her fingers clutched the edge of the chair, trembling, not because she was being fired, but because she couldn't believe the entire system she once trusted had unraveled in a single morning. But somewhere deep down, she knew she wasn't the victim. She was the cause. Greg stood frozen near the staff elevator, eyes forward, but vacant. After a moment, he removed his name badge and placed it on the counter. Amy had cried. She didn't deny. She didn't defend. She just kept repeating, "I'm sorry. I really didn't know." No one responded, because in that moment, silence was the verdict. Raymond Cleary followed behind Jocelyn at a respectful distance. He looked like he wanted to say something, perhaps another apology. But Jocelyn raised her hand gently to stop him. "No need," she said, her voice softer than ever. "This was never about me." Raymond nodded. In her eyes was something heavier than institutional power. What he had just witnessed wasn't a lawsuit. It was a lesson. That night, the financial industry's internal news circuits lit up. Quiet owner of Liberty's flagship branch orders, mass terminations over discrimination. A silent takeover with echoes that reach far. Didn't look like a prime client, the price of judging by appearance. The minority investment community spread the story like wildfire. But Jocelyn posted nothing. She gave no interviews. She appeared in no headlines. She remained anonymous, just as she had always chosen to be. Only one thing changed. Liberty's entire employee training policy was rewritten. Among the updates, a new clause. All transactions must be based on verified data, never on appearance, accent, or name. Internally, Liberty would later refer to it quietly as the Reed Rule. 3 weeks later, at a community investment conference in Baltimore, a woman took the stage, tall, composed, hair in a neat bun, glasses, a plain textured blazer with no visible brand. No one knew who she was until the first slide lit up Jocelyn Reed, Director, Sustainable Urban Investment Fund. The room went silent. She didn't speak much, but each sentence dropped like a stone into the surface of a lake that had pretended to be still. "I'm not here to tell a story about being denied service. I'm here to remind us if we must dress wealthy, speak academically, or wear power like a badge just to be respected, then we are not in a society. We are in a cultural prison, locked by prejudice." Jocelyn left the stage just as she had walked out of that bank, step by step, calm, composed. Because she knew one truth more clearly than most. When you truly own the building, you don't need the microphone to be heard. You only need to walk in and the world will realign itself.